All right, welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. So, today we're going to look at some examples of good journalism changing the course of history. And this is a great topic, very relevant to today's world, of course, and it's potentially even inspiring because even though, yes, a lot of so called journalists out there are cringeworthy and on the wrong side of history, occasionally they do stuff that is actually good and on the correct side of history. So, great journalism doesn't just inform, it exposes, disrupts, and sometimes even rewrites history. And there are a few examples here that are monumental. They basically took certain people out of power, even in a few instances. So, the power of journalism is really not to be underestimated. And, it's a very serious thing sometimes to have freedom of the press. It can topple presidents and wars and shake the foundations of global institutions, make people question all sorts of things. That's really what we have brains for. And never forget that. So today we're walking through some moments where journalism didn't just report the story, it actually was part of the story. You know what I mean? It was a fundamental shift in some cases. And let's start with a simple idea of what journalism necessarily is. It's a record, a factual analysis, noted and preserved. Journalism at its core is about recording what happened. But what happens when those records spark outrage, action, or even revolution? So let's explore 7 landmark stories that didn't just report history, they changed it. So, number one, it's a big one. It's a topic you've probably heard: Watergate. That has become a very common example. And whenever a new scandal emerges, a lot of people like to slap the word gate on the end of it, just to be cute. But it all comes back to the actual Watergate story, which was from the Washington Post, believe it or not. Sometimes, the Washington Post has done some valuable work. In 1972, there was a break in at the Democratic National Committee. Two journalists, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, start pulling threads. What they unravel is a web of corruption leading straight to the White House. Well, imagine that. There's never been corruption in that place before. But anyway, their relentless investigation didn't just win Pulitzers, it led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon, Tricky Dick himself, as he has sometimes been called. And that was back in 1974, the only time a U.S. president has stepped down. Unfortunately, we never had any other ones say, "Okay, I've been found out. It's time for me to get out of here and become a bad memory." So, in this case, it was actually successful, incredibly. And the scandal redefined the role of the press in a democracy. From then on, the phrase "follow the money" would become part of every investigative journalist's DNA. And of course, ever since that time, the US government has sort of been eroding the press here and there, whittling away at it, making it less of a powerful tool. And they've had some success doing that. But we've also got example number two here: the Pentagon Papers from the New York Times, or, the NYT, as I often see it abbreviated as. In 1971, journalist Neil Sheehan got hold of classified documents showing that multiple U.S. administrations had lied about the Vietnam War, to the public and to Congress. Well, again, imagine that. They would never they would never lie to the public and to Congress. Why would anybody be so crazy as to think a politician would lie? So the New York Times published these classified documents. The government tried to block it, but incredibly, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the press. So this is one of those moments where I would have a hard time, aligning my critique here with the sort of anarchic critique that says, oh, the Supreme Court would never, challenge the power of the government or anything like that. Well, in this case, they actually did. And, sometimes those radical narratives, they they're just not complete. This is one of those exceptions to any sort of rule like that you can't trust authority at all, that there's not even an inkling of trust that you could reasonably assign to the government itself. In this case, the Supreme Court, shockingly, in my opinion, did the right thing. And that was, I guess, because they had people in there who kind of took the ideas of the freedom of speech and freedom of the press seriously. So the fallout was massive. Public trust in government plummeted. Anti war protests surged. And once again, journalism had ripped the veil off of a government narrative, which is often what it is supposed to do. That is, when they're not being a mouthpiece for the government narrative. And you have to be really on the lookout for that sort of thing, because just because I'm talking nice things about journalists right here, for the most part, you need to remember that sometimes they do align with that dangerous narrative, whatever it is, at a given time. Like maybe they're supporting the erosion of massive freedoms here at home, like the right to due process or something like that. Maybe the media is supporting a genocide or a war, which sometimes they do. And you just have to be on the lookout for what the government narrative is, and always ask questions, about what you're hearing. It it doesn't mean the initial message is always wrong, but sometimes there are half truths, sometimes there are even quarter truths, and sometimes the biggest way to lie is to lie by omission. What part of the story are they keeping out? And how are they framing the topic? Do they have a biased presentation? So, for example, like right now, there are these protests in Los Angeles, right? And some people in the media are really focusing in on the outrageous images of a burning car or two. And sure, you might be shocked by that, but is that more shocking than the possibly hundreds of thousands of people who will be dying from the U.S. aid cuts? So you have to ask questions like that. I know some people out there will be like, "Well, those U.S. aid cuts aren't relevant," but which one is more shocking? Like as a general phenomenon, the possible deaths of people overseas, the needless deaths because they are starving and having their food resources ripped away, or having their medicine taken away, or are you more shocked by some person setting fire to a car or something like that, which by the way can happen at these sports riots anyway. Like if a person's sports team wins, sometimes people act like idiots and they go rioting through the town, again, even if their sports team wins, which is something that I never understood. But the point is, it's not the end of the world, at least not exactly, and it's certainly no worse than the way that the government removed aid that was life saving from these people overseas. So you have to be able to ask questions like that. Which scandal is more actually dangerous and has more immediate negative consequences? Because sometimes the media will use a certain image or a certain event to just distract you from greater issues that are developing at the same time. Whether those issues are totally relevant to that specific topic or not, they'll still sometimes sort of trick you in a way into seeing a certain issue as being more crucial when it's actually not. So you have to be on the lookout for that. Sorry, I went on a little bit of a sidetrack here, but I'm riffing here. So okay, the big story number 3 is a spotlight on abuse that was revealed by, or that was done by, the Boston Globe. So fast forward from the Vietnam era to 2002, the Boston Globe Spotlight team uncovered widespread child sexual abuse by Catholic priests and the systemic cover ups that enable it. So the first story was titled Church Allowed Abuse by Priest for Years, and what followed was a global reckoning. There were investigations, resignations, reforms, and sort of a switch in the way that people view the Catholic Church to a large degree. People, I mean, in some cases, people even went too far in the direction where they saw the Catholic Church as nothing but a bastion for abuse. And of course, it's not just that. Like I said, institutions are often a little more complicated. You can have good things and bad things that come out of them. Even a sort of institution that I'm not crazy about, like the Catholic Church. So anyway, one local newsroom dared to confront one of the world's most powerful institutions and change the conversation around abuse and accountability forever. Well, hopefully forever anyway. It does seem like, to a large degree, people are a little bit more skeptical of these sorts of institutions, be they religious or secular. It's sort of opened a big door into the very idea of looking at abuse and the systemic nature of abuse and cover ups. So, story number 4, The Murder of Emmett Till, as exposed by Jet Magazine. So in 1955, Jet Magazine published a photograph that seared itself into America's conscience: the body of 14-year-old Emmett Till, brutally lynched in Mississippi. His mother, Mamie Till Mobley, insisted on an open casket, and Jet's photo editor, David Jackson, captured the image. So that one photo helped ignite the civil rights movement. Sometimes the power of journalism lies in showing the world exactly what it doesn't want to see. So if you see the violence, you're less likely to be able to shrug it off. And that's really one of the true powers of journalism. That's why, unfortunately, even though I know some people personally who are like, I can't stomach seeing brutal real life images, in the media or anything like that, and they need to have it sanitized and made more palatable. But not only is that kind of cowardly, but it's actually sort of against the very premise of journalism and exposing the truth. You're literally demanding that the offensive realities just be sort of ignored, shrugged off, and just, I already said the word ignored, but forgotten about too. That's one of the reasons why. I mean, I kind of hate to say it because it sounds like I'll be picking on the left, but I've never been a huge fan of, this idea of being squeamish about language or imagery that much. Even when I was a little kid, I wanted to see reality pretty much as it actually is. I was suspicious of people who tried to hide things. You know, wh- dare I say, even if it's like, the parent or somebody hiding porn under their mattress or something. A lot of kids, that's like part of their coming of age story that people just don't talk about. They snoop around and they see reality as it actually is. Now, it might just seem like I'm going on a weird anecdote or a divergent trail here. Um, but my point is, even at a young age, people are curious and they want to know the truth, and they want to know how, disgusting people really are. But, like when it comes to their parents or their weird uncles or whatever. So they go snooping around. And that's kind of, I mean, it's murky, but that's kind of the nature of journalism too. You expose the things that some people don't want to see. Although, of course, you do have to have privacy. So it is, it is a bad thing to some degree. It's morally ambiguous, at least, to expose the truth, but quite often it's necessary. It's like, it's one of those things where you engage in a little bit of bad behavior in the quest to expose the truth, but in a lot of cases, the truth that you expose will reveal behavior worse than your initial quest to reveal the truth. Well, I'm probably wording that in a way more complicated way than it needs to be worded, but I think you know what I mean. The adult filth and reality out there, the the shocking nature of life. To a large degree, I urge people to not be squeamish about that, to not be so easily offended by it, to sort of put on a brave face to the extent possible and just power through it. And to me, that's always been, it's not just a matter of principle, it's also just a matter of not liking people, lying to my face. And, I want to know the truth. It's not just about patting myself on the back and, saying, "Oh, I'm a morally upstanding person." It's just I don't like BS. I just want people to be honest, and it's not like I never lie, but when it comes down to it, the uh, the truth is ultimately better to me than the lies. So wow, I got really on a tangent there. Hopefully, you found it entertaining at least. But anyway, the story number 5 is the My Lai massacre, or I've also heard it pronounced Me Lai massacre. I don't know which one is exactly correct, but that was done by Seymour Hersh in 1969. Reporter Seymour Hersh, he broke the story of the My Lai massacre, where U.S. soldiers killed hundreds of Vietnamese civilians. The report horrified a nation already divided over Vietnam. It stripped away the sanitized language of war and forced Americans to face its brutal realities. So it's yet another example of somebody being, a little bit bad, exposing the reality of war. And I'm sure some people are accusing him of being unpatriotic at the time and all that crap. But at the end of the day, the truth was revealed, or at least some truth. Story number 6, the thalidomide scandal from the Sunday Times. So this was also in the 1960s, and a drug called thalidomide was being used to treat morning sickness, but it apparently caused birth defects or something like that, severe birth defects. I don't remember exactly what specific ones they were, But journalist Harold Evans and his team at the Sunday Times exposed the danger and the regulatory failure behind it. The fallout was new safety laws, new drug protocols, and a new model for health journalism as public advocacy. So, story number 7, NSA surveillance, as revealed by The Guardian and The Washington Post. So, in 2013, Edward Snowden leaked a trove of classified documents. Journalist Glenn Greenwald, back when he was actually, you know, better, a better person and all that. But you also had Laura Poitras and Ewan McCaskill and Barton Gellman, but they pieced it together. The story was about massive global surveillance by the U.S. government. The reporting won awards, but more than that, it sparked international debates about privacy, security, and the role of government in the digital age. And of course, it helped make Edward Snowden a sort of household name. So people kind of have forgotten about him a little bit, but it's one of those things where at the time he was certainly a well-known person. Anyway, these are just a few of the moments when journalism didn't just tell a story, it became one, a force capable of shifting power, shaping policy, and stirring the public to action. And these aren't isolated cases, they're part of a legacy from the old school traditional press to modern digital whistleblowers. And it shows the press at its best. And it's more than a mirror, it's like a spotlight, and sometimes like a hammer too, It's it's something that could potentially put people in power in their place. So if you want more examples, I could dig into timelines, lesser known scoops, or how journalism shaped foreign policy. There's yellow journalism in the Spanish American War, and there are today's global information wars that are pretty interesting too. But for now, remember this: in the right hands, journalism can change the world for the better. So this has been a few stories that shook the system. I'm Wade, and you can subscribe for more true stories of media that mattered or matter today, of course. And if you like this episode, share it because the truth doesn't go viral on its own. And, in addition to stuff like this, I sometimes talk about movies and TV shows, although some people will always whine about something that I say um, when it comes to pretty much any topic. So, I'm never going to be perfect at this, but, I'm better than some people out there. I'll even pat myself on the back and say that much. I'm not the worst of the worst. I think overall, I'm on the right side of history, and hopefully, we'll become more on the correct side of history in the coming years because, we're in some pretty dark times right now, and things are looking pretty dumb. So, hopefully, we get smarter, and hopefully, we have some reliable people with good old fashioned journalistic integrity who can help us get out of this nonsense that we're currently living through. All right. Have a good day.